So, welcome to lesson 7. And in this lesson, we're going to talk about how to engage potential customers using your network and get that initial feedback that you need in order to improve your product and prototype. So, early adopters can provide you with incredible insights, but also there are some pitfalls with early adopters that we're going to talk you through in the rest of this lesson. This lesson will cover how you transition from thinking about different customer segments to getting your first early adopters, leveraging the network you have, and frankly, the work that's required to continue to build your network and increase the base of potential customers that you might be able to attract in the beginning, and then different ways you will collect feedback more effectively. So these are all crucial steps to before you even take your product to market in a formal way. Let's take some time to review the lean canvas that you've been working on and look at the customer segmentation. We really want to understand the difference between people that make the decision versus people who are the users of your product or solution or service. So you need to tailor your messaging based on the different audiences and segments. The decision makers look for different things versus the users. In consumer products, that's usually the same person, right? So, like for Netflix, you're the not only the decision maker, but you're the user. But in corporate products or business products like Google or Microsoft, email products or workspace products, the decision maker in your organization might be the CTO, but you may be the user or your team may be the user. So you can see kind of the difference in how decisions get made. So what we don't want to do is that confuse these two things, because the decision makers are looking for a different value proposition, right? The decision makers, you might have heard the term like no one ever gets fired for hiring IBM. Well, that's because the decision makers don't want to make bad decisions, right? And so early adopters are different in the sense that they're used to seeing things not completely work out and they have a higher degree of tolerance. So once you start rolling your product out, your early adopters that might be excited for your product aren't going to be the same people that you're talking to once your product or solution is fully built, because you'll be dealing with the decision makers. As entrepreneurs, we just love early adopters because of all of the groups that we're going to engage with. They're going to be the most excited about the problem and the solution that we're offering. And so, after working on this for months, your early adopters provide you with that initial validation around your product or solution, and it's super exciting. And we wanted to share with you the characteristics of early adopters because they're definitely different than the other groups that we're going to talk about shortly. So, early adopters are very open to innovation. Often they're trying multiple products, especially in the early stages of products. For AI products, for example, they might be trying 5, 6 different AI products right now just because they're open to trying all of these things and are okay with the less feature rich products. They are also often looking to solve a particular problem they have. And so they've identified these problems and they're on a quest to find solutions for these types of problems. And they're mission driven, right? They believe in kind of a better future or some kind of vision for a future. And they see some of the same kinds of things that you see as an entrepreneur and what it might be like if you were able to solve this problem. And then finally, they're early adopters because they're okay with some deficiencies in the product because they see the vision and have hope, and they know that their contributions are going to be valuable. And so they're much more flexible and adaptable than your typical early majority or late majority customer. So I talked a little bit about early adopters and early majority and late majority, but want to talk a little bit more about the adoption curve here with you. And so this illustrates what kind of acceptable adoption curve might look like over time across your customer segment. As we've talked about, early adopters are essential because they're eager to try your solution and they provide valuable feedback, and it'll also provide you with initial testimonials and you'll feel like you're getting that traction you need. They only represent about 13.5% of the market. And we've talked about the characteristics of early adopters. Your real long-term customer is not the early adopters. And what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up designing your product or solution for the early majority and late majority. They are the bulk of your customer base. And so the early majority and late majority segments, they're much more risk adverse. And they also need stronger proof of value. And what that means is that, the early adopters are going to create all those testimonies, but they also know that they are early adopters and they know that they're not the type that's an early adopter. And a lot of your decision makers are in this area. And so you could see in the graphic, there's that chasm, and that chasm is often hard to jump over because of the idea that you're building a product for these early adopters, or you're building a solution that's getting some traction from early adopters, and then you're trying to make the leap. And that's where all of the things that we talked about around the methodology and the process and the theory of action really come into play to help you cross that chasm. What you need to do is create a strategy that's specific for each of these groups as your product or solution evolves over time. And that'll allow you to kind of go to market with the right product, the right level of marketing, the right messaging, and all of the supports that you need in order to get your product used and implemented. It'll allow you to address those things in the right way when you really think about that segmentation of the early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. I know we covered a little bit about early adopters in the prior slides, but we just wanted to make sure we reinforce and make sure that you set expectations for the early adopters just right, because this is a common mistake we see entrepreneurs make. Early adopters make up about 13.5% of your market, and they are critical for getting feedback and getting early traction with your product, and they're curious and eager to try a lot of the new features. They may be like the beta users of your product, which is incredible. However, they may not stick around for the long haul. Like I mentioned, an early adopter of an AI product might be using 5, 6 different tools. And so they're spending time in a bunch of different tools, and they're not actually completely loyal to your product. And they are easy to drop one product to move on to the next right thing. And so that is something just to be concerned about with early adopters. And what you don't want to do is completely rely on the feedback you get from early adopters for your long-term growth. In the end, you're going to be encountering folks that aren't early adopters. They're going to be more skeptical of your solution, and they have loyalties to other products and services. And so you really need to design for that. And that's where the hard work comes. And that's why you saw in the adoption curve the chasm that exists between early adopters and the early majority. Once you clearly understand the value that early adopters have and know that you're going to have to make that leap, it's a lot easier for you to focus on the right things during the prototyping stage versus like the full general market availability stage, and how you market to those different audiences.